Hello everyone and welcome to TV Talks, a show where I take a look at both the good and the bad of what television has to offer. Today we're talking about the second season of The Simpsons. Of course, we all know what The Simpsons is, the classic Fox sitcom that is still going on to this day, after almost 30 years. So it's going to be kind of interesting to go back and look at the second season. Bit of a recap, I really liked the first season, not as much as the others of course, but it was a good start to this show that we all come to know and love. But will the second season be as good? Well, let's take a look. Right off the bat, the animation has gotten way better. After Klasky Chupo, whatever they're called, got booted because of their terrible animation quality for the show, they got some new people on board and it already looks better. The lines are smoother, the character designs are more consistent, the colors aren't as weird and crazy and off-putting, and it looks a lot more presentable and a lot more watchable, which I'm sure really helped get the show off the ground some more. It was already pretty popular right now, but this is when things were really starting to pick up. A lot more people were watching as every episode went by. And also the voices are a bit more defined. The Walter Matthau impression that Homer has is still there from time to time, but for the most part he is becoming the Homer Simpson we all know. With the deep voice, the slow mind, you can definitely see that transition, especially in the middle parts of the season. There's still a little bit of remnants of this first season and the art designs here and there, though. Like some of them characters are a bit more rubbery, some of the textures are a bit undefined, which is kind of weird to point out textures in a 2D show, but if you watch it you can kind of notice it. But how's the writing? Well, let's see when we check out our very first episode of the season. Bart gets an F, also known as the Nostalgia Critic's very favorite episode. He says it balances humor, story, and everything that you'd want to see in a Simpsons episode. While I do agree, I don't think it's as good as he led on to be. Granted, I saw the episode before I saw his countdown, so I kind of see where he's coming from. There is a lot of stuff going on here, and it's really good. However, it's not the best. It's about Bart getting an F and realizing that if he keeps failing his classes, he's going to have to repeat the 4th grade. Again, because he never seems to leave. But they don't talk about that in the episode, but what they do talk about is Bart actually trying to do well, but no matter what, his problems with attention and his overall rambunctious nature get in the way of that. While that is a good story and very good to see, it is very nice to see Bart actually care about something for a change. It's not exactly the funniest, nor really the most memorable. There are a few funny bits in there, like when you imagine seeing the signing of the Declaration of Independence, but other than that, it's not really that funny, but it is a very good story. I will give it that. So it definitely is worth watching. And of course, the Declaration signing is definitely my favorite part of it. But yeah, good episode, not great, but still good. Samson and Delilah is next. Simpson and Delilah. Oh, I see what you did there. Yeah, I always read it wrong every time I see it, but it's about Homer getting hair and then all of a sudden getting confidence, because you know Homer doesn't have hair. This was a bit more of a theme back then. Homer was a lot more insecure about his baldness, as we can see. And now him getting hair and some sort of life coach, he now all of a sudden gets the confidence to do whatever he wants. And I kind of have the same opinion on this one as I do with Bart Gets an F. Good story, not incredibly funny, but still good. I'd probably put this one right under Bart Gets an F, because unlike that one, which had a few good, memorable comedic moments, I don't really remember any jokes in this one. I don't really remember any offhand except for the title, which in itself doesn't count as a joke. But the story itself really seems to work. And as we can see here, the writers are really trying to write a lot more serious stuff right off the bat. While this does seem weird, there's a very good explanation for this. As I mentioned in my Modern Family review, doing serious stories, especially early on, really helps the audience connect with the characters. It really helps them understand their motives, their personalities, and just feel closer to them. If it was just funny and silly, yes, people would get attached to them like they would with SpongeBob or Squidward or someone like that, but it would take a lot longer. It would take a lot more time to develop. But with these kind of serious, actual, substantial stories in there, it can hurry along the characters and the audience becoming integrated and close to each other, so that way the show can have a bit more success. However, there's a very big risk to this. If the episodes themselves, their stories are not very good, or people just flat out won't care about the characters, it's gonna not only not work, but it's gonna make your show look worse. However, The Simpsons already knew that because its characters were still in the defining process and people were already starting to take liking to them, it was worth a shot. And I'd say it paid off for these two. Like I said, not quite as good as Bart Gets Neff, but it was still really good. And it's definitely good to see Homer actually do well and be happy, which is easily the best part of the episode. But one little thing I want to point out is, you remember how I said there was still some animation remnants from season 1 in this season? Yeah, there's a little bit in this. It's not that the animation is bad, it's just a lot more rubbery. It has a lot of freeze frames, it seems. Like when a character is talking, nothing else will be moving. There's a lot of that going on, especially in this one. It's not a big problem, but it's just something I kind of noticed, and it gets under my skin just a little bit, but it's not really important. But what is important is the very next episode, Tree House of Horror. The very first Tree House of Horror ever. I didn't mention this in my initial Simpsons review, but I'm sure we all know by now what these are. Every single year, minus for season 1, they have a Halloween special called the Tree House of Horror, where they have very special, non-canon episodes that can do whatever they want. They're violent, crazy, and definitely a lot raunchier than the regular episodes, because they can do whatever they want, and because it's non-canon, they can do, well, whatever they want, and they can just go as far as they can. Characters don't have to be portrayed exactly correct. In fact, a lot of them hinge on the characters not being portrayed correct, and you can't get mad at it because it's the Tree House of Horror, and this is the one that started it all. It kind of shows, though. The stories are very simplistic and very kind of typical, dark, scary, quote-unquote stories, but they're actually really funny. But hey, it's the first one. Like the very first episode of The Simpsons, it shaped what was to come with these. If it wasn't for this one, we wouldn't have had all the great ones that come after this. And this one is by no means bad. It's actually good. It's just on the lesser side of good compared to what was to come, but that's not very good for reviewing for what comes later. So I'm just going to review it right here. We have The Bad Dream House, the introduction of Kang and Kodos, and The Story of the Raven, which I really like. That one's probably my favorite of the three, but of course Kang and Kodos are awesome. They finally get their very first appearance, and of course they appear in just about, if not all, of the Halloween specials after this. Bonus points if you can tell which one's which without them speaking. Very good writing, very out there stories, good animation especially for the time. What's not to love about Treehouse of Horror? Next up is 2 cars in every garage and 3 eyes on every fish. I don't know what it is, but for whatever reason, I keep coming back to watch this one. And not anything against the episode by all means, I'm just saying, I don't get why this is one that I keep coming back to. I mean, it's good, just, it's certainly not the best. It's about Mr. Burns deciding that the regulations against his power plant are just unfair to him as a greedy corporate scumbag, so he decides to combine with the Republican Party and run for governor. It's a bit of an interesting one, to say the least, because, well, on one part, we don't know if Mr. Burns is really good or bad in this one. Sometimes it makes it look like exactly what I said, him just trying to change the rules so that he can become more corrupt and powerful. But on the other hand, it seems like he actually does have really good intentions for Springfield, because as we all know, Springfield, and presumably the entire state it's in, Oregon, according to Matt Groening, is entirely messed up and crazy, and it seems like Mr. Burns could actually do some stuff to fix it. The only problem is, we don't know if he's actually going to do all that, or if he's just crazy. It would have been good if we had a little bit more of an establishing thing in there, but it's good to see Homer actually try to help out. And I guess this is the beginning of Lisa's Democrat phase, which kind of became Flanderized later on, as we'll get into, but for now it's fine, and it's not necessarily that she's ultra-liberal in this one, just like Marge. It's more that they don't trust Mr. Burns at all, so keep Governor Bailey. Which, to be fair, I would do too. Because, have you seen the stuff Mr. Burns did before? And if you look in the future, see what he will do after this, where he gets way, way worse. The jokes are fine. They don't do very many political jokes in this one, although they will later on. But this was more of the testing ground to see what they could get away with. That's a kind of running theme through this one. As well as the serious stories, there's a lot of testing and a lot of new grounds being explored. Because the show was ready to take itself to new heights, first, it needed to do some experiments to see what would stick and what wouldn't. While this can be seen as a problem, you need to do it in a way that hides it, because if you can see it from a mile away, that's when the problem starts, if you just throw it at the wall and see what sticks. This they did, but they did it in very clever ways, because they did it multiple times and varied it up, like this one. They were seeing how far they could go with the politics stuff, and having, the antagonist be the main character, that sort of stuff. It's a really interesting story, and it's got some pretty good jokes too. I certainly give that one a thumbs up. So, what one's next? It's Dancing Homer! Another bit more serious, down-to-earth one, and we're only 5 episodes into the second season. It's about Homer dancing and dancing and dancing some more at a baseball game, and then he ends up becoming the minor league mascot, and then he goes to Capital City to become the major league's mascot, and it doesn't really work out so well, so then he's right back to the bottom. Does that story kind of sound familiar to you? They try to tell it in a way that's really nice and really calming, and you really feel for Homer, and while I do feel for Homer, while I do get where he's coming from, how many times have you heard this story be told where the little guy comes up and then tries his thing and it's a real big hit, and then eventually people get tired of it and then it comes crashing down, he has to go back to where he was originally? Yeah, not just because The Simpsons has done this at least 2 other times, maybe even 3, but you can see this just about any show, any movie. You can just look at it and you'll find it almost anywhere. But does The Simpsons put a good, interesting spin on it? In this episode, not really. It's not bad, but it's not good either. I'd give it a 5 out of 10, 2.5 out of 5, thumb pointed to the side. It's completely okay. Although the atmosphere is very good in this, that's the one thing I can credit it for, that it does different, because we really get connected with Homer, because he's a bit of a screw-up and a bit stupid, so now he finds something that he's good at, being a screw-up and being stupid in front of an audience. And yeah, it's good to see, but it doesn't really make for a compelling story because we all know what's gonna happen. Before I keep repeating myself over and over and over and over and over again, let's move on to Dead Pudding Society. This is the beginning of where we see how much Homer does not like his neighbor, Ned Flanders. Ned Flanders is a kind, haddly-diddly kind of person. Very happy, very outgoing, and for whatever reason, that bugs Homer so much that he can't even stand stupid Flanders. I mean Ned. Homer finds that both Todd, Ned's son, and Bart have an interest in minigolf, so he and Ned end up getting in a heated argument and then have a bet over which one of their sons will win at minigolf, and then they decide to push them and push them and push them. It's almost like the Great Snail Race from SpongeBob, which would come out way later. This shows just how far Homer is willing to go to get what he wants, especially against Ned Flanders. Homer may be stupid, but he's also selfish. Very, very selfish. While most times it doesn't really seem like he's aware of it, this time he knows it and he relishes in it. He wants to make sure that Ned and Todd get destroyed. And he is portrayed as the bad guy in this. He's portrayed as wrong and wrong. All 3 of those are the same word, by the way. While Ned is more just pushed into it because Homer's getting him mad, Homer is just relishing in it, and yeah, he's bad. And it's a really funny episode too, especially with what happens when they decide who wins/loses the bet. It's really good, really funny, and it's actually a really classic one too. Or at least was at the time. A lot of people seem to be forgetting this one, but this is where the whole Homer versus Ned thing really started. And yeah, testing ground, it works. Good job. Up next to bat is Bart versus Thanksgiving. Lisa spent all this time making a great centerpiece that Bart accidentally launches in the fire. Everyone gets mad at him, yells at him, screams at him, so he decides to run away from home because he feels like people don't care about him anymore. Then he realizes they do care about him, and then you can tell where this is going. I don't really like this one very much. This is one of those testing episodes that just didn't work, and another one with a lot of really serious story going into it. But the problem is this. If you look back to the earlier part I made in the summary, Bart accidentally throws it in the fire. Yes, he was being careless with the centerpiece, but even still, he did feel genuinely sorry, which is very hard to come by with Bart. And then Lisa and the whole family just kind of grinding it into him, making him feel bad for what was honestly, yes, a careless mistake, but it was a mistake nonetheless. He didn't really try to do that, and he did feel genuinely bad about it. But yet they just won't let him forget it. And then, of course, we come to the cliched second half where he cares, they all make up, blah, 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 blah. Nothing was funny, nothing was really compelling. Everyone was really mean to Bart. And it's also really forgettable. The only part I kind of chuckled at was Maggie saying, "You're the reason I can't talk," without actually talking. It's hard to explain, but it's not really one of the best. I don't really like it very much. It was one of those story ones that they tried really hard with, but it just didn't stick. Oh well, you can't win them all. Unlike the next episode, Bart the Daredevil, which is Matt Groening's very favorite episode because it's really close to his heart. Here's the story. Bart sees a daredevil and then decides to become like him, doing a whole bunch of crazy and extreme things that are entirely unsafe. With his family trying to stop him, he just doesn't listen until he decides to jump Springfield Gorge. We all know this one. This was really popular at the time, and it still is now. Actually, one of the most famous ones in the second season. But why does Matt Groening like this one so much? Because this is his story. This is what he did as a kid. He tried to do all this kind of crazy stuff because he wanted to be a daredevil too. But unfortunately, that didn't work out so well for him. But fortunately for us, because we get the Simpsons now instead of a dead man that we never really got to know. So he holds it very close to him, and of course, because he held this story really close to him, he decided to really go all out with this one. And I gotta say, this is the one in the season that perfectly blends the humor and the story. It's a very good story to see that Homer actually does care about Bart and doesn't want to see him get hurt, but also still wants to see Bart have fun, and there's also a lot of really funny stuff, especially the part we all know with Homer falling down Springfield Gorge. They've played that clip at least a dozen times on the show, and outside too, even in promotional stuff. They're still using it today. But that's not the only part of the episode. All the stuff Bart tries, all the stuff that the Daredevil does, the whole episode is just great and it just builds and builds and builds. See, Bart vs. Thanksgiving? This is how you do it. Now moving right along from one famous episode to another famous episode, Itchy and Scratchy and Marge. Maggie imitates a stunt that she sees on Itchy and Scratchy, injuring Homer. Then Marge decides to protest, and then because a lot of other soccer moms are dragging their husbands along, they protest too. And then the creators of Itchy and Scratchy, Roger Meyer Studios, decide that Itchy and Scratchy is too violent, so they decide to turn it into a loving, sharing, boring show. This episode is every bit as good as people are claiming it to be, and especially more in this day and age, because everyone is so oversensitive and all PC and stuff that this is happening a whole bunch. Looney Tunes, Tom and Jerry, and even our current shows like Steven Universe or Clarence, they're all getting under fire for being either too violent, too suggestive, too this and that. So to anyone who's being attacked or is attacking with this, watch Itchy and Scratchy and Marge, and then you'll see the both pros and cons of it. Especially towards the end with the Michelangelo David bit. Of course, the funniest part is seeing what happened to Itchy and Scratchy, but the message is great. It's not that censorship is bad, which is very, very common to see in the media because they're always the ones getting censored. They say that some censorship is good, but just not too much. They find a nice moderate middle ground. And also they leave enough stuff vague so that you can decide your own path. But that seems to be the path that everyone goes to. Censorship can be good, but not too much of it. Which especially in this day and age, we definitely need. In the words of Avenue Q, if everyone stopped being so PC, maybe we could live in harmony. Take that, Marge, who was trying to do something good for her kids. And also, starting with this one, the animation looks a little bit different. It's a lot cleaner now. There's less of that weird freeze frame stuff I mentioned. It's a lot more fluid and a lot more moving, which is especially needed in this one because there's a lot of movement in it, whether it be with Itchy and Scratchy or Maggie imitating the stunts. There's just a lot more going on, so they needed to up the quality. And from here on, the quality just gets better. What else can I say but it's Itchy and Scratchy and Marge? Bart gets hit by a car. Well, the story of this is that Bart gets hit by a car. The end. Okay, so Bart gets hit by Mr. Burns, who refuses to compensate, and while Dr. Hibbert claims that Bart is fine, they get a quack doctor, Dr. Nick, to examine Bart, and he comes up with a bunch of fake injuries, so they decide to sue Mr. Burns for a whopping amount of money. This is a bit of a story and humor mixed one, The first half is definitely more humor, while the second is definitely more story when it comes to Homer's honesty and Marge's honesty. And I gotta say the first half is a lot better. All the jokes they tell in there, like with all the fake injuries that Dr. Nick prescribes Bart to have, and Mr. Burns' stupid, over-the-top way that he claims that he was trying to save Bart. And of course, Bart's story of how Mr. Burns was some sort of child murderer. Those are great, they're hilarious. But then there's the honesty part, which isn't bad, not bad at all by any means. It could have been done a lot worse. It's just not very good. I'd say that those parts are just okay. Besides, the whole honesty thing never really pays off in the end because Mr. Burns overhears them talking about it and just finds out. So there never really was any character growth anyway, which makes it all seem like kind of a gigantic waste. Oh well, the first half is definitely really good, as definitely compared to the second half, but the whole episode overall is still good and I definitely recommend watching it. One fish, two fish, blowfish, bluefish. They go to a sushi restaurant and Homer eats a really poisonous fish that was not served and prepared right. So he believes that he only has a day left to live. This is one of the saddest episodes of them all. It still gets me the feels every time I watch it. Wow. So this is both of the tropes that come with this season. The really serious story and the testing one. Because they wanted to see how far they could push you. And it worked. This one is highly regarded as one of the saddest, most heartfelt episodes of them all. And it deserves that title. You'd better believe it does. Oh man, wow. The reactions that everyone gets from hearing this, all the stuff Homer tries to do, like listening to Lisa's saxophone one last time, him trying to be a good father to Bart for once, and then him giving up a lot of his day just to spend time with the father he felt like he never had. Because that's one important thing, is that Grandpa Simpson, when Homer was growing up, was not a good dad. He was mean, he was kind of neglectful. Not really abusive, but he was kind of bordering on verbal abuse sometimes. He was a very nasty guy, but now he feels like he kind of wants to forgive his father on his last days and just spend time with him, and they get really close. He even has a little bit of a good moment with Ned that's both funny and kind of touching. And then, of course, we all know that Homer's going to be okay. They're not going to stop the show midway through second season and become The Simpsons -1 or something. We all know that Homer's going to live, but even still, the moment when we find out that he does, wow, that was a great moment. And of course, it ends on a really nice joke with him having to go to Ned's house. That was great. But yeah, this episode just, wow. It's hard to believe this came so early in the run, because this really feels like something they could have done later with how mature their writing got and all. But no, this was in the second season, and it really, really worked. Again, Bart vs. Thanksgiving. Take a look and see how you do it right. Granted, Bart wasn't going to die in that one, but this one is definitely really, really good, as I've said many times. My words won't do it justice. Check it out. That's the one way to find out just how great it is. Then we move on to another famous kind of sad one, The Way We Was, where Homer talks about how he and Marge ended up getting together. How Homer was just kind of a loser. He tried to get Marge's attention, but she was going with Artie Ziff. That kind of thing. He tries to trick her into going, but then he ends up just kind of giving up. But then after Artie turns out to be a jerk, Marge and Homer end up getting together, and Homer, all defeated, is so happy to get taken into Marge's arms. Wow. Not nearly as plot heavy as the last one, but it's still a really good one. There's a lot of funny bits in there, there's a lot of good humor, but the story, especially in the last third, that's what really makes the episode shine. It's something really special, and it's something very well done. You can tell they took a lot of time with this one, and this really helps set the continuity for the show. This really helped develop not just Homer and Marge, but even some of the other characters. And they keep calling back to this one, keep building episodes based off it, so it has to be good. And it is, as I have said. That's 2 in a row that really give you the feels, huh? So what's next? A comedy episode. Okay, it's something to kind of break the very serious tension. It's Homer versus Lisa and the 8th Commandment. It's where Homer decides to pirate cable and Lisa really starts protesting. and protesting and protesting and protesting, but not in a really annoying, whiny way that she does later on. This time she just really feels like it's wrong and is really disappointed that her father is stealing cable. So she's just trying to get him to stop by just kind of asking him and trying to persuade him that it's wrong, not screaming and whining and demanding, but just out of genuine concern because she feels like if Homer and Marge and Bart keep doing this, they're going to end up going to hell one day. She really wants to do what's best for them, but when they deny, she just doesn't know what she can do. So she just decides to set an example for them, which eventually guilts Homer into doing it, and then so on and so forth. While it sounds a lot like a story episode the way I'm describing it, it's actually not very much of one. There's a lot more humor in there than there is story, albeit in the last little bit there is some good story in there. There's definitely a lot more of the humor stuff, and it is good too, very good. Especially that little bit in the very beginning, which has the 10 Commandments being written and announced. That is the funniest part in the episode. Now, that's not usually a good sign saying that the funniest part is in the beginning, but it's different in this one. The episode's still enjoyable and still a lot of fun anyways. And now we move on to another serious one, Principal Charming. This is probably the most underrated episode in the season, I'd say, because this one does it all right and still gets no credit for any of this. Very few people talk about this. And it stars two really interesting choices for a star at this point, Patty and Selma, Marge's sisters. Now this is before Selma's Choice in season 4 where it starred Selma. So this was a bit of an interesting turn to take, some characters that didn't appear a lot and ones who were kind of seen as antagonists. It stars them and Principal Skinner, who was definitely considered an antagonist at the time. But they're portrayed in good roles. You see, Selma's feeling lonely and feels like she really needs a man in her life because, well, she feels like her biological clock is ticking, she's all alone, and feels like she has no friends and no social life, so she just wants to start a family really soon. And then when Homer realizes that Principal Skinner is unmarried and I guess eligible, I mean, if you really knew Principal Skinner, you'd probably run as far as you can. Run and run! So he invites Principal Skinner over the same night that the two sisters are there. But Selma's too scared to go and approach Skinner, so Patty just decides to bring the two together by dragging Skinner in. But then Skinner ends up falling in love with Patty, which is really strange because Patty is a lot grumpier, doesn't like to be touched, is a lot more surly, and very, very spiteful. While Selma is crushed that Patty got someone before she did, Principal Skinner is also crushed because no matter what he tries to do, Patty just will not return his affection until eventually he starts breaking down the wall and they actually do start developing a relationship. But then at the crux of this, Patty sees that Selma is just really desperate and ends up tagging along with Barney. So she knows that if she ends up staying with Skinner, Selma's going to ruin her life. And she needs to decide what she's going to do. Which, as we all know, she sticks with Selma. Spoilers, but if you've seen any episode in the future, you know that this wasn't going to work out. How do people not talk about this one? This one is great. This has the story down perfectly, and the few jokes that are in here are actually really, really good. I just don't get it. Why does this one keep getting swept under the rug? It's better than a lot of other ones in this that get a lot of attention. Like, I'd even say this is better than Bart the Daredevil. Yeah, I went there. Oh well, let's hope this review gives it some publicity, because it needs it. Remember that name, people. Principal Charming. Next up is Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, where Homer finds out he has a half-brother named Herb who is very rich and owns a car company. So Herb, voiced by Danny DeVito, and quite well actually, I didn't even realize it was him until the credits, invites the family over, and then he says that Homer is more in touch with the common man than all his yes men and executives, so he has Homer build a car for him, which turns out to be a disaster. This one is a kind of strange story because unlike the really plot-heavy ones where it seems a lot more negative and there's a lot of negative stuff going around, this one's a lot more of a positive story up until the very, very end. It's all about happy emotions and all about family reunion and unity and living good lives and brotherly love and stuff. And it's a really uplifting bit, which is kind of crushed by the ending. Although I like this ending fine, it doesn't turn out as well as a story like this was planned out to be. With a story like this, you would expect some conflict, but it would get better in the end. And while I do like the gutsy move of having Herb go bankrupt, it just doesn't really fit for the kind of story this was. I mean, we all knew Homer wasn't going to save the company. He's an idiot. His IQ is so low, you can't test it, you have to dig for it. But still, the episode wasn't really building up to this ending, but it's kind of a take it or leave it kind of ending, and I prefer to take it because without an ending, the story would just stop. But in all seriousness, the ending is fine. It doesn't drag down the episode much at all. The rest of it is really good, seeing Homer interact with his brother he never knew he had, but when he starts talking to him, it really feels like they just saw each other last Thursday or something. Shows how close the Simpson family can be no matter what, and no matter how stupid they can be too. Good episode overall. Now Bart's dog gets an F. Yeah, they reused a title in the very same season. Normally they wait a couple seasons to do that, but nope. They're doing it right in the very season that Yeah, you get it. So Santa's little helper is all of a sudden acting really badly. He is chewing up quilts and eating giant cookies and just doing a whole bunch of bad stuff that bad dogs do. So when Homer threatens to give him away, Bart sends him off to obedience school, and he just can't do it. And he only seems to be getting worse and worse and worse until Bart just begs him enough and he's able to do some basic commands that just barely let him pass. And, well, the episode's fine. It's fine. That's basically how I can explain it, it's fine. The story's kind of all over the place. It doesn't really have that 3-act structure. It just kind of flatlines a little bit. It's just kind of a same tone ending, and then the ending's all light and happy. The episode's fine. It's just the story structure being all over the place kind of hinders the emotion. You know what's going to happen right when they set up the giant cookie or the quilt. You know what's going to happen, so it's not a very big surprise. And yeah, you do feel kind of bad for them, but it's not as strong as they thought it would be. It's a bit of a swing and a miss, but not that much of a miss. It's very simple, very easy to describe. Not bad, just not very good either. Up next is Old Money, where Grandpa falls in love with a woman who ends up dying and leaving him a ton of money, which kind of really happens midway through. Like the Telltale Head from the last season, this plot really takes a long time to get going. But unlike the Telltale Head, this one has a good reason, because it really needs to set up for, again, the big story. Have you noticed I've been saying that a lot and have pointed to that being a big theme in this season? So yes, the time is really needed for Grandpa to fall in love with this woman and for them to really get close. Because if it was just a Disney romance where it's like, oh, we're in love, whoop, left money, there not only wouldn't be a story, but we wouldn't really care. But when she does eventually go, you feel how sad Grandpa is and how guilty the family is for kind of taking away his chance to say goodbye. And it's a really nice story, and in the end, he ends up trying to make lives better with his money. Because he knew that that's what she wanted to do. Instead of just squandering it all and wasting it on cheap thrills, he decides to give it back to the community and make everything better for everybody. Even though Retirement Castle still sucks, things are a lot better there now because of Grandpa's great sacrifice and great donation. This is another one a lot of people don't talk about, but I really think it works. Not the funniest of episodes, but it definitely hits you right home. If you're watching in the right mood, that is. Brush with Greatness. Mr. Burns hires Marge to paint him and make him look great for a painting that is going in the museum. Meanwhile, Homer is trying to lose weight. This one is finally a more humor-focused one. This is one of the first times we see Smithers' overly grovelly nature to Mr. Burns because of reasons. A lot of the jokes also revolve around how terrible Mr. Burns is or how Homer is desperate to lose weight. But they really seem to work. Especially when Mr. Burns goes too far, Marge decides to take action and do the best kind of revenge she thought she could do until it turns out Mr. Burns likes it. We also get Ringo Starr on this one, and that turns out really well. It's always great to see him and stuff, and he does a great job here. With Marge's talent really getting a chance to shine at long last, because it was squelched a lot as a kid. Her teachers never liked it. And then with Bart coming along really quickly, she never got the chance to pursue her career. And now Mr. Burns finally gives her the chance, but he's a terrible, 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 terrible person. And he's just ruining the experience for everybody, not just her. So, yeah, it's a really good episode with a lot of good laughs and some good heart towards the end. And then it ends on a hilarious joke, too. Albeit an abrupt one, but still good. Now we're getting to the home stretch, people. We have 4 episodes left. Lisa's Substitute. Another really popular, sad one. Sort of. Because it starts off happy, then gets kind of sad. But it comes from many different angles. See, Miss Hoover is out, so Lisa gets a substitute who seems just perfect for her. He really understands her, he's kind, he's smooth talking, he makes the class really fun, and she feels like she can really connect to him, but maybe a little too much because Homer realizes that instead of idolizing him like a little girl should be, or at least in his view, she's idolizing the substitute, and so he tries to better himself and tries to tag along and tries to be a lot more like this guy, but Lisa's just already so captivated by this guy and really feels a connection. But then, of course, as he is a substitute, he can't stay forever and he has to leave, which makes her heartbroken and she doesn't know what she's going to do with herself anymore. And so we get points of view from both Homer and Lisa, and then they both come together at the end. It's a really well done episode, and I can't say very much about it because everyone said so much about this one, and everything they've been saying is exactly on point. And of course, it's the first appearance of Ralph Wiggum. Woo! Go Ralph! He's gonna be so much fun as we get on. Yeah! So let's just go on to the War of the Simpsons. Homer gets very drunk at a party and then embarrasses him and Marge, so then they decide to go counseling over at this lake place where Homer just wants to catch a fish. And this is another one I'm not that big on. It's not bad. Of the ones I dislike in this season, it's probably the one I dislike the least. It's just not very good. It's kind of annoying. Homer is extremely selfish in this one, because all Marge wants to do is just help him out with his problem and then just get their marriage back on track again. But Homer just wants to fish. Who is he, Big the Cat? All he cares about is the giant fish, the giant fish. He doesn't care about Marge. He doesn't care about the family in this, and it seems very out of character for him. And I said that he's a very selfish guy, yes, but he cares about his family still. He still wants what's best for Marge. When Homer screws something up, what he does is he does it in a way that an idiot would do, like he did at the party when he got drunk, or when his overall ineptitude just prevents him from grasping the seriousness of the situation. Here, he knows how this means to Marge and how important this all is, but he doesn't care. He just wants to catch the big fish! Big fish! Not very funny, not very interesting, except for the parts with Ned and Maude. That's hilarious. But other than that, completely skippable and not worth watching. Second to last is 3 Men and a Comic Book. Milhouse, Bart, and Martin all team up to buy a comic book for $100, and then they can't trust each other because, well, it's very valuable, and they think they're all going to run off with it. And of course, it's the first appearance of Comic Book Guy, a popular character that I just think is kind of okay. Oh well, he's fine here, and he's developed well here, and the story is pretty good too. It's kind of one of those half and half ones where it's kind of half story, half humor, but it's quickly turns into more humor as we get along, because the story they're trying to tell is just so ludicrous and ridiculous you kind of can't help but find it funny. I'm pretty sure that was intentional, that it kind of gives off that vibe, but I'm not entirely sure. The episode is good, albeit a little forgettable sometimes, but it's still good and worth watching. Milhouse is good here, and Martin is not annoying in this one, because Martin is my least favorite character in The Simpsons, because he's so annoying, know-it-all, bratty, but here he's actually like a real person, and a funny one at that. So it's good to see Martin in an episode that I can actually tolerate him in. That's always a plus. So yeah, it's a good one. What else can I say? Now the last episode of the season, Blood Feud. Mr. Burns is going to die because his blood is short, so Bart has his blood type, and he donates to Mr. Burns. And when Homer expects to see that a great big reward, he only gets a thank you note. So he decides to write Mr. Burns a nasty, scathing letter, albeit an immature one, but still nasty nonetheless, and then send it to him. But then, all of a sudden, he has to get it back because he realized all the horrible things he said. This one is definitely a funny one, probably one of the funniest in the season, albeit the last one. My guess is that after all this really heavy story stuff going on, all the thick drama, they really wanted some levity in there and something to change it up. So they did this one. And oh boy, is it funny. Especially with Homer trying to pretend to be Mr. Burns at the post office, trying to pretend to be him. Okay, Mr. Burns, what's your first name? I don't know. It's a great one. It's really funny, especially when Mr. Burns ends up giving the family at the end. It is great. It's a hilarious episode and very well done. And albeit another forgotten one. There's a lot of really good stuff in here that just seems to get buried and swept under the mat. This is another one that should be dug up, but for a different reason though, because it's funny, unlike, the story stuff. You can really see that their humor is really maturing from season 1. Not that the humor in season 1 was immature, but they're finding their footing. They know what's funny. They know what they're good at writing. So, they decided to do this. And I say it paid off, and it was a good way to end season 2. So what do I think of season 2 overall? I give it the Archibald seal of approval. This was much better than season 1. It took big leaps and bounds in every department. The animation, the character development, the acting, especially the stories and writing. The big 2 themes here were the big dramatic stories and testing to see what worked. And most of all the things they tested seemed to work. Here and there they had an episode that wasn't very good, but for the most part this was definitely really good. And the good episodes were way better than the ones in season 1. And the bad ones, for the most part, weren't nearly as bad as the ones in season 1. But to be fair, there were only a couple that I didn't like in season 1, and here I think there's just about the same. My favorite episode this season was One Fish, Two Fish, Blowfish, Bluefish, and then my least favorite one was Bart vs. Thanksgiving. But on further talking about it, or The Simpsons or whatever, that one. I said it was the one I disliked the least, but talking about it more, I'm starting to dislike it a lot more. But I'd still put Bart vs. Thanksgiving a hair underneath it because it just wasn't very well done, very cliched, nothing seemed to work about it, and it was also very forgettable. Luckily, people don't talk about this one, same with the creators, so I guess that worked out. As you can see here, The Simpsons is very, very well in its stride to moving on to better things and getting better. But can it continue to do that into the next season? I think you all know the answer by now, but we'll see you next time anyways. What'd you think of the second season of The Simpsons? Comment below and let me know. Okay, folks, I'll see you next time. Good night, everybody.